In today's video, we're breaking down the most horrible Karen deaths ever recorded. From a woman who lost control over a simple parking dispute, triggering chaos in the middle of traffic, to a Karen who kept taunting someone she thought she could intimidate, and the response happened faster than anyone expected. It was September 19, 2016, on a 4-lane commercial road in a suburb west of Chicago. Morning traffic was building as commuters moved through the corridor toward nearby office parks and shopping centers. Cars filled the curbside parking lane outside a strip of small businesses, leaving only tight spaces between vehicles. Patrice Holden was 48 years old and had lived in the area for more than a decade. She worked part-time in an office nearby and often stopped along the commercial strip in the mornings to grab coffee or pick up small items before work. According to neighbors, she reacted strongly to small disputes, especially when she felt other people were ignoring basic rules. Several people who knew her later told investigators that she frequently confronted drivers about how they parked around her car. At about 8:10 a.m., Patrice pulled into a curbside parking space in front of a convenience store, where she often stopped for coffee. The road carried steady morning traffic heading toward nearby office parks. She parked between two vehicles and remained inside her sedan with the engine running. A dark gray compact sedan soon pulled into the narrow space beside her. The 37-year-old driver parked within the painted lines and began stepping out of the vehicle. Patrice immediately leaned across her steering wheel and started shouting through her window that he had parked too close. Witnesses said the man initially tried to ignore the comments before briefly responding that he had parked within the lines. Patrice abruptly stepped out of her car. As the confrontation escalated, the driver returned to his seat and closed the door. Patrice walked to the front of the gray sedan and continued yelling while pointing toward the tight space between the vehicles. Several nearby drivers slowed down or turned their heads to watch the argument. She moved closer to the windshield. Witnesses later said she struck the glass with the flat of her hand and pounded on it several more times while the driver remained seated inside the vehicle. Patrice then turned back to her car, reached through the open door, and grabbed a disposable coffee cup from the center console. She stepped back toward the gray sedan and splashed the contents across the windshield and driver's side window, with some of the liquid entering through the partially open window. Witnesses described the driver wiping his face and the inside of the glass. Patrice shouted several more comments before turning away. She got back into her own sedan and slammed the door for several seconds. Both vehicles remained where they were. Then the gray sedan's engine started. According to witnesses, the driver appeared visibly angry. Instead of pulling away normally, the sedan accelerated suddenly from the curb space. The front bumper struck the rear corner of Patrice's parked car. The contact occurred at an angle. Rather than sliding the vehicle sideways, the impact caused Patrice's sedan to pivot outward from the curb. The rear of her car swung into the traffic lane, while the front remained near the parking space. The movement placed the driver's side of her car partially into the right travel lane. At that moment, a fully loaded 10-wheel delivery truck was approaching in that lane at about 35 miles per hour. The truck driver saw the sedan rotate into the roadway only seconds before the collision. Witnesses later reported hearing the horn and the sound of heavy braking, but the distance was too short to stop. The truck struck the driver's side of Patrice's sedan with significant force. The impact crushed the side of the vehicle and pushed it several feet down the roadway before both vehicles came to a stop. Bystanders ran toward the wreckage almost immediately. Patrice remained inside the vehicle, which had sustained severe intrusion into the driver's compartment. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived quickly and began emergency treatment before transporting her to a nearby trauma hospital. Despite rapid medical care, she did not survive the injuries sustained in the crash. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was catastrophic blunt force trauma resulting from the side impact collision with the truck. Police interviewed witnesses and reviewed nearby surveillance footage that captured portions of the confrontation. Investigators determined the incident began as a roadside dispute over parking that escalated into a road rage encounter. Prosecutors later filed charges against the driver of the gray sedan that included aggravated battery with a vehicle and reckless homicide, based on the finding that he intentionally accelerated into Patrice's parked car. But the woman who stepped out to control in a parking lot wouldn't be the last person whose argument turned fatal, because at a crowded farmer's market in Tucson, another woman was about to challenge a food vendor and a tray of pine nut samples she should never have touched. It was March 8, 2014, at a community farmers market in Tucson, Arizona. The morning was clear and cool, around 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Vendor stalls lined both sides of the main walkway, while customers moved steadily between tables selling produce, baked goods, and hot food. Near the center of the market, several food vendors prepared items on portable propane burners set on folding metal tables. Renee Cassell was 51 years old. She had left a county administrative job in 2012 after repeated disputes with coworkers. Since then, she had lived on a fixed income, while an alimony case moved slowly through family court. The weekend farmers market had become part of her routine. Vendors and regular visitors recognized her because she frequently confronted sellers about ingredients, food preparation, or what she described as the market's standards. Market staff later confirmed she had filed several written complaints about vendors during the previous year. One of the stalls operating that morning had been approved by the market committee 3 weeks earlier. It was a family-run stand selling pupusas, a thick corn tortilla filled with cheese and other ingredients, prepared on a flat griddle heated by propane burners. Beside the griddle sat a shallow steel pan of cooking oil used for frying certain fillings. Renee arrived at the market around 9:15 a.m., walking down the aisle while eating food she had purchased from another vendor earlier that morning. Witnesses said she moved directly toward the pupusa stall without stopping at other tables. She stepped past a small line of customers and immediately began speaking loudly about the stand, complaining that the vendor had not been properly reviewed and that the smell of frying food did not belong at the market. While the vendors continued working and their adult daughter tried to respond, Renee repeatedly talked over her. As the argument grew louder, several customers stepped aside. A tray of sample pieces sat at the front of the cooking table. Renee reached across the counter and grabbed one. The vendor's daughter tried to explain the ingredients, but Renee continued criticizing the stall and talking over her while pointing toward the cooking equipment. Witnesses said she leaned over the counter toward the griddle and oil pan as she argued about how the food was being prepared. Several nearby customers told her to step back from the cooking area. Instead, she leaned even farther across the table. As she shifted her weight forward, her forearm struck the edge of the cooking table and pushed aside a tray near the burner. The movement caused the portable burner holding the steel oil pan to shift and tip forward. Oil heated to more than 350 degrees Fahrenheit spilled over the front of the table, splashing directly onto Renee's upper chest, neck, and face. Witnesses described her screaming immediately. Hot oil transfers heat quickly and continues burning as it clings to skin and clothing. Several people nearby stepped back as Renee stumbled away from the table. Oil had soaked into the front of her shirt and continued transferring heat through the fabric. She collapsed to the ground within seconds. Bystanders rushed forward as someone called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported Renee to a regional burn center. Despite treatment, she died later that evening. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was complications from severe thermal burns, an airway injury caused by the hot cooking oil. Investigators concluded the spill occurred after the portable burner and oil pan were knocked off balance during the confrontation. No criminal charges were filed. After the incident, market organizers introduced new safety rules requiring food stalls to place barriers between cooking equipment and customer areas to reduce the risk of similar accidents. The confrontation at the farmers market ended in chaos, but only a few years later, another argument between strangers, this time outside a busy neighborhood bar, would escalate far beyond what anyone standing nearby expected. It was February 22, 2018, outside a busy bar in a suburb east of Sacramento, California. By late evening, the sidewalk patio was crowded with customers finishing drinks and talking under string lights near the entrance. Music from inside carried through the open doors while people moved between the bar and the outdoor tables. One of the customers outside that night was Marlene Group, 53. She worked from home doing data entry for an insurance company and spent most days inside, usually leaving the house only for errands. On some evenings, she visited neighborhood bars for a drink and conversation. Staff at this bar already recognized her. Over the previous year, employees had asked her several times to calm down or leave after arguments with other customers. Witnesses later described a pattern. Marlene often stood near groups she did not know, watching their conversations and commenting on their behavior even when she had not been invited into the discussion. Several patrons told investigators she had a habit of criticizing strangers for how they talked, drank, or used the crowded patio space, and she often refused to step away when asked. That evening, Marlene arrived shortly after 9:30 p.m. and ordered a drink at the bar. After finishing it, she stepped outside to the sidewalk patio where several groups of customers were standing around tall metal tables near the entrance steps. Among the customers on the patio was Divine Cerna, 28, who had stepped outside with friends to finish their drinks. Divine had some martial arts training and was standing with the group beside a tall patio table near the short concrete staircase that led down to the parking lot. Marlene moved close to their table and began commenting loudly about how crowded the patio area had become. Divine and her friends initially ignored the remarks, but Marlene remained nearby and continued directing comments toward them. Witnesses later said Marlene appeared irritated and was speaking louder as the conversation continued. Divine eventually asked her politely to give them some space so they could finish their drinks. Marlene did not move. Instead, she stepped closer to the table and continued arguing about people taking over the sidewalk. A bartender near the doorway noticed the tension but did not intervene immediately. Divine turned back toward the table and began gathering empty glasses to take inside. As she reached across the tabletop, her elbow brushed lightly against Marlene's forearm. Several witnesses later described the contact as accidental. Marlene reacted immediately. She pulled her arm back, raised her voice, and shoved Divine in the shoulder with both hands. Divine stepped backward to regain her balance. Witnesses said she raised her hands and told Marlene to stop touching her. Marlene continued shouting and moved forward again, pushing at Divine's shoulders while closing the distance between them. Divine stepped back a second time as Marlene kept advancing and yelling. At that point, Divine reacted defensively. She lifted her leg and delivered a quick kick to Marlene's upper chest to create distance as Marlene continued moving toward her. The kick pushed Marlene backward. She stumbled toward the entrance steps behind her and lost balance. Her heel slipped along the edge of the top concrete step, and her body dropped backward. The side of her head struck the corner of the stair with a sharp impact before the rest of her body collapsed onto the landing below. Several people nearby heard the sound of the impact. Witnesses said Marlene stopped moving immediately after the fall. Divine and several nearby customers rushed to her as someone called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported her to a nearby trauma hospital, but she died later that night despite emergency surgery. The medical examiner later determined that the fall had fractured the left temporal bone of her skull and torn an artery beneath it. Blood began collecting between the skull and the surface of the brain, forming an epidural hematoma that rapidly increased pressure inside the skull and disrupted the brain centers responsible for breathing and consciousness. The official cause of death was blunt force head trauma. Police later reviewed security footage from cameras outside the bar and interviewed multiple witnesses. Investigators determined that the confrontation escalated after Marlene shoved Divine during the argument. The kick occurred immediately afterward and caused Marlene to fall backward onto the concrete steps. Based on witness statements and video evidence, authorities concluded that Divine's action occurred as a defensive response to the shove. No criminal charges were filed. The argument outside the bar ended with devastating consequences. But confrontations don't only happen between strangers. In a quiet Texas neighborhood, a dispute between neighbors was about to take a dangerous turn. If you're interested in Karen cases where small decisions lead to fatal outcomes, consider subscribing to Fatal Files. We break down incidents like these every week. It was June 3, 2015, on a quiet residential cul-de-sac in a suburb north of Dallas, Texas. By 8 a.m., humidity hung in the warm air as temperatures climbed toward a forecast high of 94 degrees Fahrenheit. A landscaping truck and equipment trailer sat parked along the curb while a crew prepared tools outside the neighboring house. Wanda Kohler was 55 years old and had lived on the cul-de-sac since 2001. She worked part-time as an office administrator 3 days a week. Neighbors knew her for filing frequent complaints about property issues in the subdivision. Records later showed she had filed about 30 complaints over 14 years, 11 of them involving the same neighboring family. The Reyes family had lived next door for 9 years. Wanda had reported them over issues such as mailbox color, trash bin placement, a basketball hoop left overnight in the driveway, and landscaping she believed violated subdivision rules. City inspectors visited the property twice after her calls, but both inspections found no violations. On the morning of June 3rd, a landscaping company arrived to remove a dead oak tree and spread gravel along the side yard. The work had been approved through the Homeowners Association several weeks earlier. Neighbor notification was not required. The crew arrived around 8:20 a.m. with a pickup truck pulling an enclosed equipment trailer carrying a skid steer and tools. The supervisor, Thomas, positioned the truck to back the trailer into the Reyes driveway. Wanda came outside a few minutes later. She wore a bathrobe and held a coffee mug. She walked directly into the street and told Thomas the trailer could not park there. She said the area behind her property line was her easement. Thomas explained the work had association approval and held up the paperwork. Wanda called the Homeowners Association office from her phone. The office did not open until 9 a.m. She then called the city code enforcement line and left a message. She stayed in the street arguing while the truck idled. After about 20 minutes, Thomas told her he needed the space behind the trailer cleared so he could back into the driveway. Two crew members standing near the trailer repeated the instruction. Wanda did not move. She remained standing in the roadway near the rear corner of the trailer. Thomas began reversing slowly. The truck moved at low speed, later estimated at under 3 miles per hour. One worker on the passenger side shouted for Wanda to step aside. Another worker on the driver's side waved his arms and shouted the same warning. A neighbor watching from across the cul-de-sac also called out. From the driver's seat, Thomas was using his side mirrors to line up the trailer with the driveway opening. The ground directly behind the trailer frame was not visible from that angle. The trailer's rear steel crossmember struck Wanda across the lower back and hip. The impact pushed her forward onto the pavement as the trailer rolled about 18 inches before the driver felt resistance and stopped. Wanda was found behind the rear axle, conscious but in severe pain, as workers pulled her clear and called emergency services at 8:53 a.m. Paramedics arrived about 8 minutes later and rushed her to a nearby trauma hospital, but she died during surgery. The autopsy found a fractured pelvic ring and torn pelvic vessels that caused massive internal bleeding. The official cause of death was hemorrhagic shock caused by pelvic fracture and vascular injury. Police interviewed the driver and crew. A neighbor's security camera showed Wanda standing behind the trailer while workers shouted for her to move. Investigators determined the driver could not see directly behind the trailer during the maneuver. No charges were filed, and the landscaping work resumed the following week. But arguments don't only escalate around heavy equipment. In Arizona, another confrontation between neighbors was about to unfold during a dangerously hot afternoon. It was July 11th, 2017, in a residential neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. An excessive heat warning had been issued that morning. By early afternoon, temperatures were expected to reach about 114 degrees Fahrenheit. Streets were quiet, as most residents stayed indoors. In direct sun, the dark asphalt driveways and roads had already begun heating far above the air temperature. Gloria Finch was 58 years old and had lived in the same house for 19 years. She bought it with her husband in 1998. After their divorce in 2011, she remained there alone. Gloria worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a local heating and air company. In early 2016, the house next door was converted into a short-term rental property. Gloria strongly opposed the change. Over the next year and a half, she filed complaints with the city zoning office, her homeowners association, the rental listing service, and the state consumer complaint office. Records later showed 14 formal complaints, all closed without finding a violation. Neighbors said Gloria sometimes confronted guests when they arrived. On 2 occasions, visitors called police to report arguments in the driveway. Officers documented the encounters, but no enforcement action followed. Gloria kept copies of her complaints in a folder. On July 11th, local news stations repeated the heat advisory throughout the day. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had reached about 114 degrees Fahrenheit, according to nearby weather stations. At 1:48 p.m., a rideshare vehicle stopped in front of the rental house. 5 women visiting from Denver stepped out with luggage for a weekend trip. Gloria came out of her front door before they reached the walkway. Holding her folder, she walked directly into the driveway and stood between the group and the front path. She told them the property was operating illegally and said they should not enter. The rideshare driver confirmed the address on his phone and left after completing the drop-off. The visitors began pulling suitcases from the sidewalk. Gloria stepped forward again, blocking the path to the entry. One of the guests, who later told police she was a nurse, suggested moving the conversation to the shaded porch and offered her a bottle of water, but Gloria declined. The discussion continued in the open driveway under direct sunlight. The guests spoke calmly and asked questions about the complaints she mentioned, while Gloria continued explaining why she believed the property violated local rules. Around 2:20 p.m., another guest again offered water and suggested stepping into the shade near the covered entryway. Gloria declined a second time and remained standing on the asphalt driveway. By 2:30 p.m., she had been in direct sunlight for more than 40 minutes. Witnesses said her speech became repetitive as she continued arguing about zoning complaints. At 2:39 p.m., Gloria stopped mid-sentence and appeared unsteady. Her knees bent and she dropped into a seated position on the driveway without bracing herself. One of the visitors, a nurse, moved to her immediately. Gloria's skin felt extremely hot and her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and she did not respond clearly when spoken to. The nurse called emergency services. Responders arrived at 2:47 p.m. and found Gloria confused and disoriented. Paramedics measured her core temperature at about 107.4 degrees Fahrenheit and began emergency cooling. She was transported to a nearby regional hospital. Despite aggressive treatment, her condition worsened over the next several hours. Medical records later showed signs of organ damage consistent with severe heat stroke, including kidney failure, liver injury, and abnormal blood clotting. Gloria died later that evening. The medical examiner concluded that her death was caused by hyperthermia due to environmental heat exposure. The examination documented extensive heat-related damage across multiple organs. Police documented the incident and filed no charges. Witness statements confirmed that Gloria had remained in direct sunlight during the confrontation and had declined several offers of water and shade before she collapsed. Thank you for watching. If you're ready to see more Last Moments videos, click right here.